My husband and I were at the supermarket, and our baby was being especially fussy, so we took her for a quick drive, the motion of which usually calms her down. It only took about 10 minutes to settle her, and I was still in the store, but was unsure how much longer I'd be, and there's poor cell reception inside. So we pulled back into the parking lot to wait for me. It was an unseasonably nice day, so we took her in her car seat to sit in one of the benches outside the store. He took a business call and had just sat down absent-mindedly rocking the carrier when a woman, well-dressed, mid-30s, average height, fit build, approached them. It's not uncommon for people to ask to play with our baby. She's got big rosy cheeks, soft wisps of gold hair, and the most adorable gurgly toothless grin, especially when she's deep in a good nap. But her nap schedule is paramount, so my husband was preparing to tell the woman she actually couldn't play with our baby right then. She walked right over in their direction, brimming with nonchalant confidence, and before he could even finish his sentence, explaining that she was napping and not to be touched. She picked up the carrier and started walking off. He was in shock for a minute, not fully believing someone would be ballsy enough to do something so sinister in plain daylight, so he said, "Excuse me, put her down," as his panic mounted. She remained calm the entire time, but when he called after her, she started walking away more briskly than when she'd approached him. He ran full speed ahead, tried to grapple the carrier out of her hands, and finally resulted in restraining her arms. The woman yells, "Help! He's trying to take my baby! Kidnapping! 911! Help!" kicking him in the shins and pulling a pink bottle of pepper spray out of her handbag. Of course, no one in the parking lot was clocking the earlier interaction and assumed that he was really a kidnapper, a lone man in a Deadpool t-shirt versus the tiny, well-dressed woman. Immediately, a man knocked my husband to the ground and was holding him down. He could hear bystanders encouraging the woman to file a police report, but she was doing a very convincing job of acting shaken up and insisted she just wanted to get home. To make matters worse for my husband, she was driving a minivan. He was in a raw state of panic, realizing the entire parking lot had banded together to inadvertently facilitate the kidnapping of our daughter. He was begging and pleading with them, but no one was listening. They just kept screaming at him that the jig was up, and he needed to lie down and wait for the police and stop terrorizing the young mother. My husband finally had the novel idea to show them family pictures on his phone, but, too panicked to think clearly, this manifested as him shouting, "I have pictures of the baby on my phone," which of course everyone interpreted as him either having stalking photos or worse, pornographic images of the baby. It was at this point that a man, I can't entirely blame the man considering what he thought was going on, kicked my husband as hard as he could in the ribs. It was at this point that I was coming out of the store, and I thought he was being robbed by these people. I was yelling for security, so panicked my chest constricted and I could barely get any sound out. It was only then that I realized that he didn't have the baby with him. When I saw he was being held by a woman, I was relieved. I thought maybe the woman had intervened to move my daughter out of harm's way while my husband was being robbed and was walking away to get help. I couldn't find a security guard outside the store, so I ran to the people holding my husband down, waving my wallet and pleading, "Take everything you want, just let up and leave us alone." One of the men holding him down said something like, "Lady, we need to wait for the police to deal with him," and I was so confused. Why would the muggers have called the police? I just kept stammering, "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" and made out someone saying, "He tried to abduct that woman's kid." I didn't understand, and was sure I'd misheard him. My husband would never hurt a child, and we have 4 kids. If he was going to commit a crime, bringing home another kid would be the bottom of his list. I kept trying to understand what the man was saying, and suddenly it all clicked. I looked around for the woman who had the baby carrier, and she was halfway across the parking lot. I went into total ballistic tiger cub mode, literally leapt out of my heels and sprinted across the parking lot. I'm not a UFC fighter. I've never even taken a self-defense class, so all I could think to do was grab the woman by her hair and squeeze her throat with my other hand, which didn't do much. She was getting away even as I grappled with her. Amazingly, none of the other bystanders had yet to connect that my husband was telling the truth, and this woman was absconding with my baby. I yanked on her hair as hard as I could, and that was enough to make her drop the carrier. I was so scared and surprised that I actually just threw myself on top of the carrier, covering the entire thing like a blanket, and stayed that way without saying or doing anything else. The woman left. Not one person tried to stop her. Even though she was clearly leaving without the child she claimed was hers, which would be pretty damn incriminating if I had watched the scene unfold. Within the next couple of minutes, police had arrived. After all that, there were still several bystanders who explained it all as my husband trying to kidnap the baby. The police, to my horror, assumed that she must not have had bad intentions. The first questions they asked me after getting her description weren't investigative. They were questions thinly veiled, trying to convince me not to pursue charges, still placing blame on my husband. A small sampling includes, do your husband and the baby look dissimilar? Is there a chance she thought he was abducting the baby and she was trying to intervene? Could your husband have been doing something inappropriate or violent to the baby that would make her feel compelled to extricate the baby from the situation? Did she seem groggy or confused? Could she have mistaken either of them for her own family members? They spent more time verifying that the baby was actually mine than they were concerning themselves with the fact that the baby was not actually hers. My husband called his brother at that point, who works in an office with lots of lawyers, and connected with one ASAP, who gave the priceless advice to get every officer's name and badge number, to request copies of the store's security tapes right away, and to escalate our complaint higher up the chain if these officers weren't taking us seriously. Finally, we had reason enough to believe we were being taken seriously, and we went home, and both just shook and cried until we had to get our other kids from school. My husband is seething with rage and grappling with the feeling of helplessness from how little he was able to do, and has 2 cracked ribs from when the man kicked him. To the officer's credit, they did ask if he'd like to press charges, but considering the man was genuinely convinced at the time that he was on the right side of intervening in a kidnapping, and stayed to talk to the police and apologized profusely when the truth became clear, he declined to press charges. Amazingly, and frustratingly, there are still people who stuck around to talk to the police, who were giving my husband dirty looks, and one man who even implored the police to involve CPS to verify it was really our baby. Parking lot kidnapper, and parking lot skeptics. You better hope we don't meet again. Since the moment I started working at this restaurant 6 months ago, the alleyway behind the restaurant had always given me a bit of an uncomfortable feeling. To gain a layout of this restaurant, it's located in the middle of downtown, 5 minutes from the US-Mexican border since we're located at the tip of Texas in the Rio Grande Valley. The alley itself was not located behind the establishment. You must walk past its patio, then past our garage until you reach the side back door. Then you have to prop it open as the door locks behind you once it's closed. During the day, I usually see people walking back and forth across the alley when I go to take the trash out. It's typically a safe location, though it's also prominent for its homeless population. They're usually harmless, despite a few that are noticeably mentally ill. My colleagues have even gotten to know a few, and have given leftovers whenever possible. I work as part of the kitchen staff at this restaurant, and most of the time will work past 10 p.m. At night, my boss usually never lets the women take out the trash just to be safe, especially as a petite, 5-foot, Hispanic, 28-year-old female. Anyway, since this quarantine started, our kitchen staff had become quite small, so I usually help take out the trash with one of the other men working. This night was pretty slow, and my fellow coworkers and I were encouraged to clean up and leave early. At around 9:45, I decided to get 2 of the slightly full trash bags and take them back out myself, assuming someone will see my actions and take the other 2 after me. As I walked past the patio to the garage, my gut began to flutter. I got to the back door and paused. Maybe you should wait, I told myself. But the smell protruding from the bags was nauseating. I pushed the door and propped it open with a brick we usually kept nearby. The alley was dark and silent, and the air felt menacing. The only light illuminating was the bulb above the door. I walked quickly to the bins and lifted up the top and dumped the trash. Then slowly a man stood up from the other side of the dumpster. He wasn't very big, but he looked a lot older. He was sweating, but his demeanor seemed agitated. He must have been crouching and waiting for some time. I jumped back, holding my hand above my heart that seemed to be pulsing through my chest. The man looked at me, eyeing me as my steps moved backward. He shook his head, motioning for me to stop. He was far too close for me to outrun him. I looked at his bushy, dark brows and dark black eyes. Most of him was still cloaked in the night surrounding us. His clothes didn't look homeless, but I still assumed he was, since it's common for them to be out here at this hour, usually waiting for food. I told him I had no leftovers, but he shook his head again and took out a medium-sized knife. My eyes widened as I took in a breath. The following exchange took place in Spanish, but I'll translate. "I don't have my purse. I was working. I'm still working." "Just come with me," he said, using his knife as a pointer. My mouth grimaced. Having no idea where this small amount of courage came from, I said, "My friend's coming right now with the rest of the trash." "No, come now," he said more hurriedly, and stepped closer. I stepped back again, speaking again with a little more tenacity. They all saw me come over here, and there's more trash, so he's coming right now. He's outside right now, I just need to yell. You're not going to scream, I'll gut you. To this day, I don't know what came over me, but I replied with, Mírame? Or, watch me. We looked at each other, daring each other. We both heard footsteps coming from inside the garage, and he ran past me. I stood there, breathing again. I didn't even know I was holding my breath. I turned to see my friend John come out the door. We're almost done over... He stopped after seeing my face. What happened? I explained everything as tears ran down my face. My friend decided to run down the alley to try to catch him, even though I told him not to and that he was gone by now. It was about 5 minutes until he came back. John relayed to me that no one was around except for some homeless guys we were familiar with. He asked them if they saw someone running from the alleyway, and they said yeah, but they didn't recognize the man, and took off in the opposite direction towards the border. John took me back inside and told our boss what happened. They called the cops, whose station was pretty close by, and they sent someone to patrol the area and gather a description from me, which I gave. My boss let me leave early, and John walked me to my car. He told me it's too bad we don't keep a camera back there. It would have been cool to see how I handled the guy. I smiled slightly, but my stomach was still in knots. He looked at me and apologized. I moved my hand to stop him and told him I'll be fine. Unfortunately, I still work there, but I've been excused from trash duty from now on. Obviously, they never found him. I don't want to think about what would have happened to me if I was more complicit. Something gave me the courage to argue back to him, and thank goodness that my friend came out just in time. So, man waiting behind the dumpster, I hope we never meet again.